My name is Velma Thompson, and I'm 67 years old. For most of my life, I believed that family meant everything. I trusted that the people closest to you would stand by your side through thick and thin. I thought that when you opened your heart and your home to someone, they would respect that gift. But sometimes the people who smile at your dinner table are the same ones plotting behind your back. Sometimes the person who calls you mother is counting the days until your funeral. There are people in this world who look at your age and see weakness, who mistake your kindness for foolishness. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories like this one. But remember, sometimes the silence of an older woman is the most dangerous thing of all. Let me take you back to the beginning to understand how I ended up in that lawyer's office on what should have been just another difficult day of grief. My husband Robert and I had been married for 45 beautiful years. We built our life together from nothing, starting with a small apartment and big dreams. Robert had a brilliant mind for business, and together we created Thompson Medical Equipment, a company that specialized in hospital supplies and diagnostic tools. Over the decades, we grew our business into something substantial. By the time Robert became ill, we had accumulated around $8 million in assets. Our home was a lovely colonial in the suburbs, fully paid for. We had investment accounts, savings, real estate, and the business itself. Robert always made sure I was involved in every financial decision. He would say, "Velma, this is our money, not just mine. You need to know where every penny is." Our daughter Sarah was our pride and joy. At 42, she had become a successful pediatric surgeon at Children's Hospital downtown. She was brilliant, compassionate, and everything we had hoped she would become. When she was 34, she met Marcus Williams at a medical conference. He was 45 then, a certified financial planner who specialized in wealth management for healthcare professionals. Marcus seemed perfect for Sarah. He was well-educated, professionally successful, and appeared to genuinely care for our daughter. When they married 8 years ago, Robert and I welcomed him into our family with open arms. Marcus was charming, well-spoken, and always seemed interested in our stories about building the business. He would ask thoughtful questions about our investment strategies and often complimented Robert on his business acumen. But looking back now, I realize those questions were never about learning from Robert's wisdom. They were reconnaissance missions. The first real signs of trouble began 18 months before that awful day in the lawyer's office. Robert was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. The man who had built a medical supply company found himself at the mercy of the very machines he had spent his life selling. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. During Robert's treatment, I noticed Marcus becoming more involved in what he called the family's financial future. He would arrive at the hospital with folders of papers explaining to Robert why we needed to optimize our estate planning and consider the tax implications of our current structure. At first, I thought it was sweet that he cared so much about helping us navigate this difficult time. But then I started noticing the private conversations. Marcus would pull Sarah aside and speak in hushed tones about scenarios and timelines. When I approached, they would quickly change the subject, or Marcus would suddenly remember he had an important phone call to make. I began to feel like an outsider in discussions about my own family's future. The most unsettling moment came about 6 months before Robert passed away. I had returned home early from a doctor's appointment and heard Marcus on our patio talking loudly into his phone. "Look, the old man is on his way out," he was saying. "The doctors give him maybe 6 months, maybe less. Once he's gone, it's just the old lady, and honestly, how long can she possibly hang on at her age? We just need to be patient." My blood ran cold. I stood in my own kitchen, listening to my son-in-law discuss my husband's death and my own mortality like stock market projections. When I confronted Sarah about it later, she looked exhausted and said Marcus was just trying to be practical about planning for the future. She asked me not to make an issue of it because Marcus was under a lot of pressure at work. After Robert's funeral, the mask began to slip even further. Marcus immediately positioned himself as the family's financial advisor, offering to help me sort through all those complicated financial documents. He would arrive at my house with his laptop and briefcases, spreading papers across Robert's old desk like he owned the place. "Velma, you don't need to worry about understanding all this," he would say with that patronizing smile. "This is exactly the kind of thing Robert would want me to handle for you." He started making suggestions about simplifying my portfolio and consolidating accounts. Every conversation felt like a gentle push toward handing over control of my finances. What really bothered me were the phone calls. Marcus thought I couldn't hear him, but our house had thin walls. I would catch fragments of conversations where he discussed the timeline and managing expectations. Once I distinctly heard him tell someone, "Don't worry, the old lady doesn't understand any of this stuff. She'll do whatever we tell her to do." During this time, I noticed Sarah becoming increasingly distant. My once vibrant daughter seemed tired all the time, stressed in a way that went beyond normal grief. When I asked if everything was all right in her marriage, she would deflect and change the subject. I started to wonder if Marcus was pressuring her at home the same way he was pressuring me. One evening, about 3 weeks after the funeral, I accidentally overheard a conversation that chilled me to the bone. Marcus was in Robert's study, which he had basically taken over talking to someone on his cell phone. "Look, I've done the math," he was saying. "She's 67 years old. Actuarial tables say she's got maybe 15 years left, probably less given the stress of losing Robert. We just need to be strategic about this." I realized then that Marcus wasn't just planning to help manage my finances. He was planning to inherit them. The thought hit me like a physical blow. This man was sitting in my dead husband's chair, calculating how long I had left to live, so he could figure out when he would get his hands on our life's work. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Thomas Brady, a lawyer I had known for over 20 years, who had helped us with some business contracts before we retained the family lawyer, Henry Morrison. I asked Thomas to meet with me privately, and I didn't tell anyone in my family about the appointment. The day of the will reading arrived grey and drizzly, matching everyone's mood perfectly. Robert had been gone for 2 months, but the pain was still fresh. I chose a simple black dress and my pearl necklace, the one Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary. As I looked at myself in the mirror that morning, I made a promise to my reflection. Today, I would find out exactly who Marcus Williams really was. The law office of Henry Morrison was exactly as I remembered it. Dark wood paneling shelves lined with legal books and the smell of old leather and coffee. Henry had been our family attorney for 20 years, handling everything from business contracts to our estate planning. He was a kind man in his early 70s, with silver hair and gentle eyes that had seen many families through their most difficult moments. Present in the conference room were myself, Sarah, Marcus, and 2 of Robert's closest friends from the Rotary Club, James and William. Robert had specifically requested that his friends be present as witnesses, something that seemed sweet at the time, but would prove to be providential. Henry began by expressing his condolences again and explaining the process. As you all know, Robert was very thorough in his estate planning. He updated his will just 6 months ago during his illness, and everything is quite straightforward. I watched Marcus carefully during this introduction. He sat straight in his chair, hands folded, wearing what I had come to recognize as his professional expression. But I could see tension in his jaw, and his foot was tapping silently under the table. Henry began reading the will. Robert had been generous, but clear in his wishes. To his beloved wife, Velma Thompson, he left the house all financial accounts, investment portfolios, the business assets, and the bulk of his estate. To his cherished daughter, Sarah Williams, he left $500,000 and my grandmother's jewelry collection, which had always been intended for her. There were smaller bequests to charities and his Rotary Club friends, but the message was clear. Robert had trusted me to manage our life's work and take care of our family's future. As Henry finished reading, I watched Marcus's face carefully. His professional mask slipped just enough for me to see the disappointment and calculation in his eyes. He had clearly expected a different outcome. The room was filled with the usual mixture of sadness and relief that comes with these formal proceedings. James and William approached to offer their condolences and support. Sarah hugged me tightly, whispering that she was proud of me and knew I would honor Dad's wishes. That's when it happened. As the small crowd of people milled around, offering comfort and discussing the next steps, Marcus moved closer to me. With everyone else engaged in their own conversations, he leaned down near my ear. What he said next would haunt me for weeks and ultimately seal his fate. "Don't worry about spending all that money, Velma," he whispered, his voice barely audible, but dripping with false sweetness. "At your age, you probably won't have time to go through much of it anyway." Several people nearby caught fragments of his comment. James raised his eyebrows and looked uncomfortable. William actually chuckled, apparently thinking it was some sort of gallows humor appropriate for the occasion. Even Henry Morrison heard enough to look disturbed, though he maintained his professional composure. But I heard every word. I heard the calculation, the dismissal, the cruel reduction of my remaining years to a financial inconvenience. In that moment, sitting in that leather chair in Henry Morrison's office, I realized that Marcus had just made the biggest mistake of his life. I looked up at him and smiled sweetly. "Thank you for your concern, Marcus. That's very thoughtful of you." He smiled back, clearly pleased with himself for what he thought was a clever little joke at my expense. He had no idea that he had just declared war on the wrong old lady. The ride home from the lawyer's office was uncomfortable. Sarah drove with Marcus in the passenger seat and me in the back. The silence was heavy, broken only by Sarah's occasional sniffles and the sound of rain on the windshield. I could see Marcus in the side mirror, and he looked satisfied in a way that made my skin crawl. Once we reached my house, Marcus immediately began what he called taking inventory of the practical matters. He pulled out his ever-present notebook and started making lists of accounts that would need to be transferred, policies that required updates, and investments that should be reviewed for optimization. "Velma, I know this is overwhelming," he said, settling into Robert's favorite armchair like he belonged there. "But the sooner we get these financial matters organized, the better. You don't want to worry about all these complicated investment decisions." Sarah sat on the couch looking exhausted. I could tell she was caught between grief and the strange tension that had been building between Marcus and me. "Mom, maybe Marcus is right. Maybe it would help to have someone handle the technical stuff while you focus on healing." That's when Marcus made his second mistake. "Exactly, Sarah. Your mother needs to focus on enjoying her golden years, not worrying about market fluctuations and tax strategies. Women of her generation just weren't educated about these things." Women of her generation. The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. I had helped build an $8 million business, had been Robert's full partner in every major financial decision, and this man was talking to me like I was a confused child. Over the next few weeks, Marcus's true colors became impossible to ignore. He began dropping by my house unannounced, always with some urgent financial matter that required immediate attention. He would sit at Robert's desk, spreading out papers and speaking to me in that slow, patronizing tone people use with elderly relatives they assume are losing their mental faculties. "Now, Velma. This investment account is very complicated. Why don't we just move everything into something simpler? I know a very safe mutual fund that would be perfect for someone in your situation. But what really opened my eyes was what I discovered by accident. I had come home early from a grocery run and heard Marcus on the phone in Robert's study. The door was partially open, and his voice carried clearly. No, you don't understand. The old lady got everything, but she's not going to live forever. Sarah will inherit it all eventually, and I'll have full control over the finances. We just need to be patient and maybe help speed up the process a little. My hands shook as I set down my grocery bags. Speed up the process. What did that mean? I stayed hidden in the hallway and continued listening. Look, she's already showing signs of confusion. It wouldn't be hard to convince a judge that she's not mentally competent to manage this much money. Sarah would support me because she trusts my professional judgment. Once we get power of attorney, the money is essentially ours. The conversation continued, and I learned that Marcus had significant gambling debts I never knew about. He owed over $150,000 to some very dangerous people, and he was counting on gaining control of my inheritance to pay them off. As I stood in my own hallway, listening to this man plot to steal my husband's life work, I realized that Marcus had made a third and fatal mistake. He had underestimated a woman who had spent 45 years building a business and learning to read people. That evening, I called Thomas Brady and scheduled an emergency appointment. It was time to take action. My meeting with Thomas Brady took place on a Tuesday morning at his downtown office. Thomas was a sharp man in his early 60s who had always respected my business acumen. When I explained what I had been observing and overhearing, his expression grew increasingly serious. Velma, what you're describing sounds like financial elder abuse. And potentially worse, he said, taking careful notes. But we need evidence. Court-quality evidence. Thomas introduced me to Patricia Sullivan, a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes. Pat was a former police detective in her 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She understood immediately what we were dealing with. I've seen this before, Pat told me during our first meeting. Family members who see an elderly relative's inheritance as their own retirement plan. The good news is that Marcus sounds arrogant enough to leave a trail. What Pat discovered over the next 3 weeks was worse than I had imagined. Marcus Williams was living a double life that would have shocked Sarah if she had known the truth. The gambling debt was just the beginning. Marcus had been running illegal poker games in a rented warehouse space, taking a cut of every pot, and borrowing money from loan sharks to cover his own losses. He had forged Sarah's signature on several credit applications, opening accounts that she knew nothing about. Most disturbing of all, Pat discovered that Marcus had taken out a life insurance policy on me 6 months earlier, listing himself as the beneficiary. When she dug deeper, she found internet searches on his work computer for topics like digitalis overdose symptoms and undetectable heart attack triggers. Marcus wasn't just planning to wait for me to die naturally. He was researching ways to help me along. Velma, we need to involve the police, Thomas urged during one of our strategy sessions. This man is dangerous. But I had a different plan. I wanted Marcus to destroy himself, to reveal his true nature in front of the people who mattered most. I wanted Sarah to see exactly who she had married, and I wanted it to happen in a way that would protect her from any legal fallout. Thomas and Pat helped me craft what we called Operation Revelation. We would give Marcus enough rope to hang himself, but we would do it safely and with witnesses. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. We would create a scenario where Marcus believed he was about to gain control of my finances, and his reaction would reveal everything Sarah needed to know about his true character. Thursday evening, I called Sarah and Marcus for dinner on Sunday. I've been thinking about what Marcus said about organizing my finances. I told them, I think it's time to be practical about these things. Maybe Marcus is right about setting up some kind of trust. I could hear the excitement in Marcus's voice when he responded. That's very wise, Velma. Very wise indeed. Sunday arrived sunny and warm. Sarah and Marcus came over at noon, and I served Robert's favourite pot roast with all the trimmings. Marcus was more animated than I had seen him since the funeral, talking enthusiastically about modern estate planning strategies and optimised tax structures. After dinner, as we sat in the living room with coffee, I made my announcement. I've decided that Marcus is right about simplifying things. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to sign papers giving him power of attorney over all my financial affairs. Thomas Brady has prepared everything. The reaction was immediate and telling. Sarah looked surprised and slightly concerned. Mom, are you sure about this? That's a big step. But Marcus was practically glowing. Sarah, your mother is making a very smart decision. This way, she won't have to worry about any of the complicated financial management, and we can make sure everything is properly optimized for tax purposes. That's when he made his fourth and final mistake. Besides, Marcus continued, turning to me with that patronizing smile, let's be realistic about the timeline here, Velma. You're 67 years old. How many years do you really have left to worry about investment strategies? This way, when you pass away, everything will already be properly structured for Sarah to inherit without any complications. The room went completely silent. Sarah's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. Even Marcus seemed to realize he had said too much. Did you just calculate how many years my mother has left to live? Sarah asked, her voice dangerously quiet. That's when I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope. Actually, Sarah, before we sign any papers, I think there are some things Marcus should explain to both of us. I handed the envelope to Sarah, my heart pounding as I watched her open it. Inside were copies of everything Pat had discovered. Bank statements showing Marcus's gambling debts, credit applications with Sarah's forged signature, screenshots of his internet searches about untraceable poisons, and most damning of all, a copy of the life insurance policy he had taken out on me. Sarah's face went through a series of transformations as she read. Confusion gave way to shock, to horror, and finally horror to a cold fury I had never seen from my gentle daughter. Marcus, she said, her voice deadly calm, would you like to explain why you took out a life insurance policy on my mother? Marcus's composure cracked instantly. Sarah, I can explain all of this. It's not what it looks like. Really? Because what it looks like is that you've been planning my mother's death since before my father even passed away. Marcus stood up abruptly, his face flushing red. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. Do you have any idea what it's like being married to a doctor while being expected to maintain a certain lifestyle? Do you know how humiliating it is to have less money than your wife? So you decided to steal from my mother. I wasn't stealing. I was planning for our future. Your mother is old, Sarah. She's going to die soon anyway. I was just making sure the transition would be smooth. The words hung in the air like poison. Sarah stood up slowly, the papers still clutched in her hand. You researched how to poison her, Marcus. I never actually did anything. I was just exploring options for the future. Options for murdering my mother. That's when Marcus completely lost control. Your precious mother isn't as innocent as you think. She's been spying on me, hiring private investigators. She's been planning this whole setup to make me look bad. You made yourself look bad when you started plotting to kill her. Marcus realized he had revealed too much. His face went pale, and he began backpedaling frantically. I never said anything about killing anyone. You're twisting my words. But Sarah was already pulling out her phone. I'm calling the police. Marcus lunged for her phone, and that's when something inside him seemed to snap completely. Fine. You want to know the truth. Your mother is a stupid old woman who doesn't deserve to control all that money. She's taking up space and resources that should belong to us. Robert built that fortune for his family, not for some senile old lady to hoard. That senile old lady is my mother, and she helped build every penny of that fortune. She didn't build anything. She was just married to the man who did the real work, and now she's sitting on millions of dollars while I can barely pay my debts. Sarah stared at her husband as if seeing him for the first time. You're talking about murdering my mother for money. I'm talking about being practical about the natural order of things. That was the moment Sarah's phone connected to 911. As she began speaking to the operator, Marcus realized what was happening. He started toward the door, but I was ready for that too. Marcus, I said calmly. I should probably mention that Detective Patricia Sullivan is sitting in her car outside my house right now. She's been recording this entire conversation through the wire I've been wearing. The look of pure panic on Marcus's face was almost comical. He spun around looking for escape routes, but there were none. Within minutes, we could hear police sirens approaching. As the officers handcuffed Marcus Williams in my living room, he made one last desperate attempt to manipulate the situation. This is all a setup. These two women conspired against me. I'm the victim here. One of the officers, a young woman who had clearly seen this type of domestic manipulation before, looked at him with disgust. Sir, we have recordings of you discussing plans to poison an elderly woman for her inheritance money. I don't think you understand who the victim is here. As they led Marcus away, he turned back to Sarah with one final cruel comment. You'll never find another husband willing to put up with your family's dysfunction, Sarah. You're 42 years old. Your biological clock is ticking. Without me, you'll end up a lonely old spinster just like your mother. Sarah looked him straight in the eye and smiled. Marcus, I'd rather be alone for the rest of my life than spend one more day married to a man who planned to murder my mother for money. The door closed behind him, and suddenly my living room was quiet again. Sarah and I sat down heavily on the couch, both emotionally drained from the confrontation. Mom, Sarah said quietly, I'm so sorry. I should have seen what he was. I took her hand in mine. Sweetheart manipulators are experts at hiding their true nature. He fooled me too for a long time. How did you know to investigate him? I told her about the conversations I had overheard, the patronizing comments, and the growing sense that something was very wrong. The comment he made at the will reading was the final straw. That's when I knew I was dealing with someone who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to his inheritance. Over the next few hours, Detective Sullivan briefed us on what would happen next. Marcus would be charged with elder abuse, financial fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence was overwhelming, and his outburst in my living room had been recorded by both the wire I was wearing and Sarah's phone call to 911. The legal proceedings moved quickly. Marcus's gambling debts and forged documents created a clear paper trail that prosecutors could follow easily. When faced with the overwhelming evidence, including his recorded confession in my living room, Marcus's attorney advised him to accept a plea bargain. Marcus lost everything in the divorce. The prenuptial agreement he had insisted upon, which was supposed to protect his assets, actually worked against him because it made Sarah's inherited money completely separate from any marital property. Since most of their shared assets had been purchased with Marcus's illegal credit accounts, Sarah was able to walk away financially clean. The gambling debts consumed what little legitimate money Marcus had saved. His professional license was revoked when the Financial Planning Board learned about his criminal conviction. The last I heard, he was working at a chain restaurant downtown, living in a studio apartment, and still making payments to the loan sharks who had threatened him. But Marcus's downfall, while satisfying, wasn't the most important part of this story. The most important part was watching my daughter rebuild her life and rediscover her strength. Sarah moved back into her childhood bedroom for a few months while she processed everything that had happened. Those evening conversations over tea were precious to both of us. She talked through her guilt about not seeing Marcus's true nature sooner. And I shared stories about my own journey of learning to trust my instincts about people. "I keep wondering if there were signs I missed," she would say. "There probably were, but that's not your fault. You loved him and you trusted him. Those are beautiful qualities, and you shouldn't lose them just because one person proved unworthy of them." Slowly, Sarah began to heal. She threw herself into her work at the Children's Hospital and started reconnecting with friends she had lost touch with during her marriage to Marcus. She joined a hiking club and took up pottery, rediscovering interests that Marcus had always dismissed as wastes of time. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Sarah bought a charming little house just 10 minutes from mine. She created a garden that would make Robert proud and adopted 2 rescue cats who clearly adored her. Watching her bloom again was worth every moment of stress and fear that Marcus had put us through. As for me, this experience taught me that age really is just a number when it comes to protecting yourself and the people you love. I learned that my instincts honed by decades of reading people in business situations were just as sharp as ever. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is to give them exactly enough rope to hang themselves. I still live in the house Robert and I shared for so many years, but now it feels lighter somehow. Sarah visits regularly, sometimes bringing friends from work or her hiking group. The house that Marcus tried to claim as his inheritance is once again filled with laughter and love. I also developed an unexpected friendship with Detective Pat Sullivan. She retired from investigative work 6 months after Marcus's case closed, and we discovered we both love mystery novels and good wine. She often jokes that I should consider a second career in private investigation, but I tell her I'm quite happy being retired from the business of catching criminals. The money that Marcus coveted so desperately has become a source of joy rather than anxiety. I've been able to help Sarah buy her house, donate generously to the Children's Hospital where she works, and establish a scholarship fund at the community college for older women returning to school. Every dollar I spend feels like a victory over Marcus's assumption that I was too old to enjoy my own money. But perhaps the most important lesson from this whole experience is about the power of patience and careful planning. Marcus assumed that because I was an older woman, I would be easy to manipulate and intimidate. He mistook my kindness for weakness and my grief for confusion. What he failed to understand is that women my age have seen enough of the world to recognize predatory behavior when we encounter it. We've learned to trust our instincts and take action when necessary. Age doesn't make us vulnerable. It makes us wise. The comment Marcus whispered at the will reading that day was meant to remind me of my mortality, to make me feel powerless and small. Instead, it became the catalyst for his own destruction. Sometimes the cruelest words people speak reveal more about themselves than about their intended victims. I think about that moment often. Marcus thought he was delivering a clever insult, a reminder that my time was limited, and therefore my opinions didn't matter. What he actually did was declare war on a woman who had spent decades building a business, raising a daughter, and learning to navigate a complex world. The irony is that Marcus was right about one thing. At 67, I probably don't have unlimited time left on this earth. But what he failed to calculate was how I would choose to spend that time. I chose to spend it protecting my family, preserving my husband's legacy, and making sure that a dangerous man could never hurt anyone the way he tried to hurt us. Every day, I wake up in my beautiful house, knowing that my daughter is safe and happy. Knowing that Robert's life work remains in the hands of people who will honor his memory. I'm reminded that age is not a weakness, experience is not something to be dismissed, and the silence of an older woman is not submission, it's strategy. Before I close this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever encountered someone who underestimated you because of your age, your gender, or any other characteristic they thought made you vulnerable? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please like this video. If my story resonated with you, and subscribe for more tales of resilience and justice. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they're stronger than they know. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that every day is a gift, no matter what your age. Use that gift wisely, trust your instincts, and never let anyone make you feel like your voice doesn't matter. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and protecting the people you love.